Welcome back to the Breach Report, where we tell you about this last week's latest breaches, what happened, what kind of data was stolen in them, who was affected by the breaches, and how users and companies can prevent or mitigate these attacks in the future. I'm Joshua here with Jason Firch again. And this week we're going to start off with a Utah COVID-19 testing service breaching themselves. The Molson Coors company's production was impacted by a cyber attack. A fake ad blocker is used to deliver malware that mines Monero, and an emerging threat that is pretty similar to the SolarWinds second stage Nobelium attack we talked about last week in its TTP. And we're going to follow that one probably in the weeks to come as it breaches more. So, starting off with Utah, a COVID-19
Excited for
testing
this one
service
here.
exposed. Oh yeah,
I
this
gotta.
this one is good. This one's different and kind of sad because this was not a ransomware. It was not anybody malicious. This was user error resulting in 50,000 patient IDs, personal information, uh, passports, all kinds of information being leaked out on the internet. So here's a good picture right here. And we can see this is actually the S3 bucket that's publicly accessible, patients-images.s3.amazonaws.com, which it has been taken down by now, thankfully. But you could have navigated straight to this and seen somebody's Utah driver's license or their passport, insurance ID card, anything like that. There was over 207,000 images
So this was
spilled on
just
this S3 bucket.
publicly accessible from their site. Someone was uploading these images for patient records. It seems as part of the testing, and then it just seems like. And this seems very bad.
Yes.
You
So,
always talk about, it's funny because we always talk about like the end user, and it's like, well, the
right.
phishing and links and everything. It's like, well, what happens when the end user unintentionally does something like this? Where does that
What if they
fit in
have no
that,
control
right?
over it and somebody else does it to them, right?
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah.
So, and this information is coming from Comparatech Cybersecurity, who investigated this. So they said that all of this information, which was ID scans, driver's license, medical insurance cards, passports, and other IDs, were on the web in this S3 bucket without a password or any other authentication required to access it. So no PEM files, nothing. You could just go to the website and there's all the stuff. So here's kind of the root directory here, and each one of these JPEG files is a scan in of some form of identification from these patients. Uh, they say we do not know how long the data was publicly accessible prior to Comparatech's discovery of it, but here's a bit of a timeline. Starting with January 25th, the first of two databases was indexed by a search engine, which is not good. Um, Jason, you could probably talk about that a little bit. That means if people are searching for things on Google, they can this S3 bucket might actually start coming up, right?
Yeah, so basically, if you don't want something to be found on Google, you would assign it a no follow, right? No follow, no index tag. And it would
Right.
just say, hey, when the bot crawls this page, don't include it in the public index. Doesn't mean that that's going to happen in all cases. But in this case, it seems like, and I don't know, this is more of like a content management system question. The CMS that runs the back end of their website, how things are uploaded and stored and everything. It seems like wherever the root of the file was on the web server, was accessible obviously through the search engine as part of that CMS. But to me, it almost kind of sounds like some person in the process, whoever's responsibility it was to upload these images, just maybe didn't know any better. That's what I'm kind of getting the feeling of, and it's kind
Yeah.
of, we kind of laugh at this, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, this happens. I mean, some people just don't know, and it's, you know, when you start dealing with things like HIPAA, ignorance isn't a defense or anything like that, but at
No,
the same
ignorance is
time,
expensive.
yeah, ignorance is expensive, but at the same time, it's like you've got how many thousands of people are trying to get through this one office
Yep.
to at a very specific time in the year where people are all trying to get their vaccines and everything. So it was a rush job, and they just weren't thinking about it.
That's
That's
true.
my inclination.
Yeah, I mean you're right about that. It's part of a disaster response, and so that's probably the more level response to it. However, I mean not even a password, dude. Like that's I I I don't even know. Honestly, here's another thing that kind of frustrates me is why does Amazon let us do this, right? If you go to Amazon's CIS controls, which I do have a link for, and we can put this up following this, but they'll show you how to configure everything, and they have their foundational best practices guide, and part of it right away says how to turn off public access to S3 servers. I mean, it's like a 2-minute read, so I mean, it really takes you not trying at all, or just really, really not knowing. Maybe this was given to
It's
somebody who had no idea anything
it's
about
probably both.
IT.
It's probably both. And it's probably not an IT thing though. Like I was just saying, a CMS, it's probably someone who has access to the website. Could be, a dev person who a developer, they get hundreds of requests a day. In some cases, they don't know any
Yeah.
better. They're just updating.
I'm gonna stop you right there. Developers don't know any better. It's something that needs to stop, and I'm gonna put down right here. Secure software development lifecycle is a real thing, and
I'm talking about a web developer,
Sec
front
DevOps.
end. I'm not talking about like writing code.
Why would yeah? So it's a front end developer who goes. It doesn't matter though, honestly. Like
It does though, because that nature of that person's job is not to be security aware. I'm telling you right now, I work with
sure.
developers, web developers daily.
Well, they're not given that impetus, right? But
They're
that's what I'm
they're
saying is
literally
that
given a
should
task. Here's a
yeah.
task, do the ticket. They're not thinking about any of those other things. They're
But I
thinking
mean,
about site
we use
structure and
computers. You're right. You're right. But here's my point perspective, and they're not given that task. It's not part of the training, and there's a ton of IT or computer related fields that security is just not part of it. It's like, well, that's for the security people, but it's doesn't need to be like that. And then security doesn't have to be hard, but there's some really basic stuff that you can teach people. I mean, how hard is it to put this in a web dev course? Is making sure you have a securely built AWS website. I mean, it's not hard. It's literally going to their here, I'll pull this up right here. Look,
yeah, no, I
I
mean,
mean, they've
again,
got it
I don't
available.
disagree with you, and it's one of these cases where it's incredibly simple. You're right,
Yeah, it's
but
crazy.
I'm going to say right now, if you are working in an organization that has resource constraints, right?
Yeah,
You don't have the time.
yeah.
They're simple doesn't matter when you've got other things that need to have priority. So, I mean, again, like this is a little speculation. I don't know who, they don't really say who's responsible for this, but if it were someone who just didn't know any better, I don't think a training course would have mattered. I don't think
Well, that's not what I'm talking about.
it's
It's a
your
course.
practices.
I mean, like, if you were shifting left again, like, don't put it on the companies to put their people through an annual security course. That's never going to work. It needs to be built in as like it has to be an aspect of the development of the training. When you go to school to be a web developer, when you start learning whatever it is to be a web developer, to be a Python developer, to be a Java developer, to be anything on the computer, especially if you deal with the internet, you've got to know more
Yeah.
about security, and that needs to be part of the education. And that's, I think, where it's lacking. It's not the companies and it's not the developers themselves. You can't really put it on them. It's they nobody has built it into learning the field securely,
Hmm.
but we use computers for everything. We have to now. We have to.
Security is catching up. Yeah, I think that's kind of the key there. It
Yeah.
wasn't it was, ooh, look at these shiny new tools that we can go make money off of, and then
Right.
security catches up as an after effect, and it's like, oh, okay, I guess we should include that too.
Oh, security is so boring. It holds us back, right?
Yeah.
All right. So on the other, so this was a human error thing. Let's wrap this one up real quick. So for all these people who were affected, typical thing. Be on the lookout for phishing scams, ID theft. It's really unfortunate. We've talked about what companies and what everybody can do to kind of prevent this in the future. Is again shifting left, thinking about this, making sure this is part of your, maybe you just have field manuals, right? So if people need to rapidly set up things, just have a security team who reviews your policies on building your websites or something, and make sure that they have that included in there, right? Something simple like that, that's a repeatable task, and it's not learning. You're just repeating it, becomes muscle memory. But that's really the only way to fight the human aspect, right? Is repetition and making it muscle memory to be secure and a little smarter about it.
I think it will happen naturally over time, right?
Yeah,
Over time, more people will become more security aware.
I hope so. We're gonna have to do a breach report every hour if it doesn't let
Well,
up.
what I mean is, I think it's just a natural progression.
Yeah,
Like all
absolutely.
things, like with technology, people learn, they adopt, and they understand the best practices.
It's a lot better than it used to be. I mean, I hear people, non security people talk about security more.
Hmm.
VPNs, things like that. It's really cool to hear. So let's move to another one. This one's another really big one, but it's not human error, and it's not a ransomware attack either. Molson Coors beverage company was hit with a cyber attack. This is an 8K SEC filing statement, and so an 8K statement is it's basically just an unplanned announcement that could have material or financial effect on the company. So what they're saying here in this is something happened and it's probably going to impact us. On March 11th, 2021, Molson Coors Beverage Company announced that it experienced a systems outage that was caused by a cybersecurity incident. The company has engaged leading forensics information technology firms and legal counsel to assist the company's investigation into the incident, and the company is working around the clock to get systems back up as quickly as possible. So their systems are down.
Completely down. They're not in production, and this is a big name, right? I mean, you've Molson. I mean,
I've heard of them.
Coors.
Yeah.
You've had probably multiple other beers. Coors Light, right? Molson, obviously. Keystone.
Okay.
If you're in PA, that's a pretty big one. Foster's. What's another big one here that comes to mind? Blue Moon. Blue Moon,
Ooh.
actually, that's a
Oh,
big one.
really? I love Blue
Yep,
Moon.
yep.
Oh
Red
man.
Dog. Yeah, so they're huge. And what does this have? The food and beverage industry as a whole, it's all about volume, and it at scale. You keep your costs down. And so what happens when the production halts and an incident like this? It's you're talking.
Long
I mean, a
term.
ransomware might have actually been better for them, to be
Yeah.
honest with you, because
Yeah.
it's not like they would have been like, oh, $24 million. Okay, good, go away.
Right.
I mean, they're probably losing that a day, an hour. I don't know, but it's in the millions.
Oh yeah. So, that kind of makes me think of something here though. Is like, how long do you think they'll be impacted by this? Even if they get so they did get their production back online as of late today, but I'm assuming there's probably more consumption of beer in the country right now with COVID going on. What do you think?
It's interesting. I was just looking up the stats on that, and there was that huge uptick um, when everything started out. And I think, let's see here, hard liquors increased by 33%, and wine sales were up 12%. Beer sales are actually down 2%.
Interesting. Hmm.
But maybe some of that could have been attributed to the bars as
Bars
well.
and restaurants, yeah.
Um,
Beer's pretty big
so,
at restaurants. Yeah.
but I know as a whole, the industry did well. Like
Yeah.
the beer industry, like that segment of it, did very, very well.
Should have invested there.
Yeah, right.
So they say, although the company is actively managing the security incident it has caused and may continue to cause a delay or disruption to parts of the company's business, including its brewery operations, production, and shipments. The rest of this is a bunch of SEC stuff here. So as I mentioned, they are back online. This comes to us from Fox 6, who originally broke the story before 4 hours ago today. That's would have been 5 p.m. Monday. Said Molson Coors is beginning to brew beer again after a cyber attack. So this sounds like they weren't brewing beer at all, which that's 4 days of not brewing beer at the Milwaukee brewery. That has got to be enormous.
Again, I mean, it's shipments that get delayed. It's what about promises to deliver, right? And
Right.
maybe they have customers that have expectations of them that you need to have. Like you see this a lot in like big box retailers like Walmart, for example. They'll go in and they actually negotiate their positioning because they have the platform, they have the people coming in and shopping. What they'll do is they'll go to the suppliers and say, look, you need to meet this quota. If you don't meet this quota, this is the fine. All right. and
Oh,
and
wow.
there's and this is what the stocking fees are going to cost, and this is how it's going. This is where we're going to position your brand based on how much you're paying us to stock it. Like there's a lot of things that like large retailers can do, and
Interesting.
for a company like this, I mean, again, it's volume, right? I mean, they measure a successful year in the millions of gallons of beer sold. So any idle time is time that the competition is getting a step ahead of you. Is time that there's you know potentially ingredients are going bad. So
Yeah.
there's all of these like incidental costs that kind of add up over time, and then as this is going to be inevitably going to hit their bottom line pretty hard.
Oh, yeah. I didn't realize that they could be fined for not meeting a certain quota on those, lots of
Depends
deliveries.
on contracts. I mean, these guys are pretty big, so I'm
Yeah,
sure that there's going to be some forgiveness, but at the same time,
that's
yeah.
crazy though. Wow. Now I understand where they're really making the money selling other people's products in stores. It's not really from pulling money off the sales, it's from all these contractual fees and
I mean, it is the
stocking fees
sales.
and all that.
It is the sales.
Hmm,
That's just icing on the cake because they can kind of leverage their not
interesting.
monopoly, their positioning.
Huh. Yeah, I did not know that. But yeah, I mean that this sounds expensive for sure.
Yes, yes. Again, they probably would have rather had a $24 million ransomware.
So that's something that I found really interesting about this. I looked around and it really doesn't seem to be a ransomware. There's no ransom statement. I saw some people said ransomware in some of the reports, but you know, maybe it was and they just weren't forthcoming about that. But it's interesting to see something that just actually cripples production. Most of these ransomwares we've been talking about haven't had an impact at all, or has been very limited in case of that one logistics company we talked about a few back.
Yeah, a lot of it is starting to encroach in the real world, and we're seeing this again. Like it's the reliance on third party service
Yep,
providers,
right down here.
and again, like outsourcing systems and services, it's completely within bounds of best practice, right? Nothing wrong with it. It's just you have to go about it the right way. You can't just add on services and not loop in other teams, and you can't just go purchase technology stacks integrated into your systems and not think about what level of access they have into your systems and whether if they get breached, if someone can get through into your system through theirs. Like um, that's kind of the scenario we're seeing time and time again.
Yeah, it's getting worse. Honestly, it feels like it is. These attacks are getting more expensive, both in forms of the ransom they ask for and the impact that they cause on companies, especially here in the case of Coors. I mean, look, they had a file with the SEC. That's not good. That could have an effect on their stock price too. They're basically
Oh,
saying,
it already has. It already has.
oh,
Because
sure, yeah, it's
the
four
moment
days.
no, it's not even that. The moment they announced that they were breached had a negative impact on their stock. I mean, I haven't looked at it. I guess I should I should probably take a look at the
Yeah, I'm gonna take a look too.
take a look at that. But so while you're taking a look at that, yeah, I mean, it is interesting because these attackers are getting a little bit more bold. They're starting to realize that these companies are willing to pay out, and it's just a cost of doing business for them. And so, where does this lead us from a security standpoint? How do we make sure that we're securing ourselves from these third party attacks?
Yeah. So again, we'll move back to this statement here: the reliance of third-party service providers. This has been a big one. This was the cause of SolarWinds, Excellion, all these guys. The way you protect yourself from attacks with third-party services is, I mean, most simply, is don't have third-party services. If you are a big enough company to be able to afford the all of the resources, the time and the money and the investment in building your own stuff, do it. It's Yes, it's a little more expensive, but it's cheaper than being breached for 4 days and paying these giant ransoms, building up technical debt. But obviously, that's not feasible for everyone. You have to rely on third-party service providers, so you have to manage your third-party risk. You have to do risk assessments, like actual risk assessments. I used to do these for an oil and gas company. When somebody wants a third party, you put this fairly sizable form in front of them, but what you're asking is where is our data going on your systems, and everything that is yours that our data touches, what are the security controls implemented? Do you have ISO certs? Do you have PCI certs? Whatever it is, that's how you can at least manage and mitigate it, and protect yourself, and say you've done your very best. And then you probably have cyber insurance. So you can go, look, we did our best, and they'll pay for it. So
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens with this story. I'm gonna keep track on this one. Just kind of a fun one, not a fun one,
look at
but
that one.
wait.
So
So they
this
were
is
hacked
it was the
down.
11th when they
Yeah.
announced. Yep. So
And then they announced immediately on the 15th is when they were back up online, and
yep,
whoop,
boop, back
some
up.
of those maybe Wall Street bets got at it. All right. Anything else to talk
GME.
about on this story?
Not on this story. I'd like to follow up on a little bit, at least on my personal time, kind of see what was going on. I'd be curious what the attack was. Maybe we'll have something on that next time.
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe it's a link to something.
This one comes to us from Threat Post. Pretty small one, but fake ad blocker delivers hybrid crypto miner slash ransomware infection, or what they're calling a ransom miner. Dun dun dun. Sounds really ominous.
Ransominer.
Ransom miner. So
Label everything.
everything's well, it's got you got to be fresh, right? You got to keep it cool. So this has affected more than 20,000 machines in 60 days. That's 2,500 users a day on average, which is pretty good. I mean, if that was a website traffic, that would
I was
be
gonna ask that. I was like, what is that? Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, if you're trying to get someone, that's not bad. Not a bad
yeah.
start.
2,500 a day is a decent net to cast, and I mean, this is probably still going on. This is just what Threat Post, when they where they caught it here in this announcement. So what's cool is this malware impersonates adblocker and open DNS service. And apparently it's been around for a while, because they're saying here it's on the rise again. So this is something that's probably been updated. We talked about updating things in
It's
one of our other.
interesting because it's timely and relevant in the marketplace. Think about it, Dogecoin and Coinbase and all these apps that are coming out. Like I see in my feeds all of the time, and I don't really, read too much stuff on crypto, but I see feeds all of the time. Download our crypto app, do this on crypto. It's so easy to buy Bitcoin, so easy to do this. And it's like, yes, it is, but it's also very easy for you to just take my account and wipe it. So
Yeah.
whether it's the company doing it or whether it's the case of this malware and it resurfacing, I mean, it makes sense. It's perfect timing.
Yeah, and I mean, don't forget that cryptocurrency did start out in the dark web with doing a lot of unsavory and illegal things. I mean, it's not all it was for. It was a research thing, but that was picked up more rapidly than legitimate purposes were in the beginning. Um, so Monero, Monero's been around pretty long time, not as long as Bitcoin, but I've heard about them for a long time. It's a good one to mine. It's easier to mine, and I see it a lot with crypto miners. I think it's because it is easier to mine. Bitcoin these days is
Mhm.
like takes an ASIC, right? So you can mine Monero on a server. Um, this one uses, so it's actually the open source XMRig ransom miner. So crypto miners use, it's like a software that runs and does it. So we see malicious actors taking open source stuff again and weaponizing it. And it's probably going to be another trend too this year. So the malware disguises itself as AdShield Pro, and it looks and acts like the Windows version of AdShield, ad blocker, and it also impersonates the OpenDNS service while it's running. So AdShield is exactly what it sounds like. It's an ad blocker. It's a real legitimate service, but there is no AdShield Pro. It's impersonating. It's an impersonation attack. So they get people to download them, click on them, and what ends up happening is it starts up. So after you start this program, the impersonated OpenDNS service runs. It changes DNS settings on the device so that all the domains are resolved through the attacker's servers. So it actually sets up a nice man in the middle, right?
I think I've seen this before. Hold on, this is starting to look familiar.
It's going to get more familiar as we go on, and I think it was last week we talked about one that does this same kind of thing, right? So it prevents users from accessing certain antivirus websites like malwarebytes.com. It substitutes the DNS servers, and it starts updating itself by running update.exe. So this malware keeps itself updated, which is really cool. You know,
So they get a foothold in the system, and then they have this secure connection, and then as they are inside the network, they can update the malware to suit their needs as they're in your system.
Yeah, make sure it's, the latest version, just like you do with any legitimate software.
They just patch their malware to undo your patch. That's crazy.
Everybody should do patching because the bad guys are even doing patching.
Yeah,
So
I mean, there you go. There's proof right there.
yeah, your patch management program's
Is
got to
there a
be
word for
awesome.
that? The bad guys patching malware? Is there like a specific term for that?
I don't
Coin that?
think so. I don't know. We maybe, man. We really need to get a malware researcher on here, somebody
We
who's
do.
really an expert in this kind of stuff. So if that's you, by the way, reach out to us in the comments. So this updater that we're talking about here, it pulls in and runs a modified transmission torrent client, which transmission is a very lightweight torrent. You can run it on mobile, anything, and this one has been specifically modified to send the ID of the targeted computer along with some installation details to the CNC server, and then it downloads the miner. So these software miners have to be set up for the machine they're on to be the most efficient. So, these guys want to make sure they're getting the most monero out of their attack.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Parts of the files are encrypted, making it harder to identify by threat researchers. Does that sound familiar? um, so then they get this flock.exe which runs. It calculates the hash of the parameters of the infected computer. So this is the part here where it's actually setting it up. It's like, all right, what is the system I'm on? How much RAM does it have? What kind of hard drive is it running on? All these kinds of things it needs to know to get it all set up and built from this .pack file, which is it's a common data pack file. Um, if the hashes don't match, the execution is stopped. Otherwise, the payload is decrypted and installed. So again, if you're running this in a sandbox, for example, it's probably not going to execute. This is specifically targeted. Sounds familiar again, doesn't it? This
Yeah,
is
yeah. They're obscuring themselves, and then they're continuing to hide themselves from the
yeah.
sandbox environment. Sorry, you were going to say something else.
Yeah, I was going to say, we talked about Nobelium, that's where they're doing that
Mm-hmm.
with that Sunburst thing. So then the miner's got it, they want to make sure it's continuously running. So it's got a little service check task. So it says this thing's really awesome, right? It's updated, it's tuned for efficiency on the machine, and it's got a little keep alive service to make sure it's running. That's a great program, and that's how most programs should run. But
Yeah.
it being malicious, not very good. So this thing's, using up CPU to mine. What I found interesting here was Threat Post says overall in Russia, users in Russia and Commonwealth of Independent States countries are most likely to be targeted. CIS states being Kazakhstan, Belarus, areas typically bordering Russia, large Eurasian zone there. So I don't really know what that means. What do you think, Jason? It's kind of an interesting target, huh, for Monero
Yeah,
mining.
I was actually just Googling. I was just looking to see where Monero is mostly mined from.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because China, I believe China, somewhere around 65% of all Bitcoin is mined in China.
Bitcoin. Okay.
So what I'm trying to see, and I'm not saying anything obvious here, what I'm trying to see is this specific to that region? Is this coin
Mhm.
more readily accessible? Although you said it's an easy coin to mine, and so maybe not, but it's also
Yeah.
not one that I'm too familiar with. I'm not too familiar in the crypto space, but yeah, I don't know. That's a really great question. Why that region specifically? Maybe it was access. Maybe that
That's a good point. Yeah.
person is just regionally they're familiar with that area. Maybe they are from that area.
And it's easier to target that way, maybe. Yeah.
Potentially,
Hmm.
um, those are two reasons or two thoughts off the top of my head. Although again, like I don't know if that region is mining this coin in any specific volume.
Yeah, a lot of speculation there. It seemed interesting. It stood out. I've seen crypto miners before, typically though on cloud services, which to me seem like great targets because I mean you can just spin those to the moon, right? But maybe that's what they're trying to avoid. Who knows? Uh,
Right.
Access or detection seems to be a big thing. So how do you get rid of this? If you have downloaded AdBlocker Pro, if any of this sounds familiar and you think that you might be infected, look for these services running, flock.exe, update.exe. Look for these files here, program data flock. This is in the threat post article that we will link here. Pretty straightforward. You're looking for some specific directories and files and you need to delete them. Now, I don't know if this is still the case. It's been a very long time since I've had a malware, but I can remember trying to uninstall viruses on my computer, and because stuff was hooked in prefetch or elsewhere, it would come back every single time you
Hmm.
deleted it and restarted the computer. So restart in safe mode and then do this would be my suggestion.
Okay, that's a good tip. Yeah.
Yeah, if somebody knows that that's wrong for sure, and you can tell me that, leave a comment because it's been a long time since I've had a virus on my computer.
You're doing all
Yeah,
the right things.
one I'm not researching, right?
The only other thing I'd say about this one is, they were very clever in the naming convention here,
Mhm.
with how they obscured the ad shield, ad pro. Just if you get prompted to download something, just go to Google, visit the site, and just look. Just kind of apply 2-second common sense. Don't click on everything. Do take the time to read the terms and conditions.
Yeah, I got a better
Or
one
at
for
least
you.
face value. Mm.
Don't download adblocker. Use Brave. Brave has it built in. Look at all this nifty stuff here.
Oh,
Look at
that's
that's our
cool.
yeah
I don't
trackers
use
and ads
Brave,
blocked.
but that looks fun.
It's built in, so you don't have to manage plugins. Some plugins can be more aggressive. Some people will swear by whatever their plugin is, and it's like, yeah, sure.
Right,
It's true. It's better, but Brave I love because it runs like Chrome. It acts like Chrome, but it cuts way back on the amount of content that's displayed on pages.
are you
So
getting some pizza and beer money for that one?
yeah, I'm set up here. Yeah, you can get basic attention tokens here, and you can send them to people as well. It's kind of cool. It's their new little don't add me, dude, kind of thing, right?
Yeah, the privacy first.
Yep.
So we have some emerging threats. I think we want to talk about this in particular, and we know it's not necessarily a breach per se, but I think it has a lot of interesting signs of techniques that we've looked at in the past, in the SolarWinds attack, and the Acelian breach. So I think that kind of taking a look at some of these emerging threats um, are very interesting perspective that we can kind of see and how it will apply to maybe future attacks.
Yeah, I like these, especially kind of at the end because they're fun. And a few times we've talked about some of these kind of emerging threats, and later on there's a breach related to it. It's like, oh, that's familiar. I always like seeing stuff that's familiar. So this thing's pretty cool. And this article, it comes to us from Intizer. They're actually a cybersecurity firm. I hadn't really heard of them before this, but they had a really good article on it. Now, this article, which again is going to be linked, gets extremely detailed. I'm going to skip over too much of the coding stuff because I am neither a coder nor a malware researcher. So, um, the key takeaways here are that they discovered a sophisticated backdoor targeting Linux endpoints and servers. Based on the tactics, techniques, and procedures, the backdoor is believed to be developed by Chinese nation state actors. The backdoor masquerades itself as Polkit Daemon. They named it RedXOR for its network data encoding scheme based on XOR. The malware was compiled on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Ooh, wow, compiled on RHEL. That's fancy. We provide recommendations for detecting and responding to this threat below. This is from Integer again. So right away, this is kind of cool. Red Hat Linux is interesting thing to see malware compiled on. That
How
does
so?
suggest a well, that's it's enterprise Linux. It's a professional Linux. There's a license for that. It's a professional one that like governments use. So
Hmm.
it wouldn't be typically used for your small, maybe a small cyber gang or individuals, right? They're going to use something more open source like Debian, whatever. Uh,
So you think they're writing this specifically for, well, obviously they're writing it specifically for the Linux, but like
right?
the end user in mind is probably a high value
Yeah,
target, like a high, Fortune 500 or maybe even government.
sure. Well, yeah, but what's really suggesting here is the fact that the malware was compiled on Red Hat Linux means that's where it was built. So the people who built it are using a subscribed to, licensed version of Linux.
I see.
So they're probably a pretty big company too. Hence why this is attributed to Chinese APT,
Hmm.
right? So let's kind of move down to the connection here. There's a lot, like I said, on this article, and so
Very
I want to
technical.
yeah, it's super technical. I just want to digest the key takeaways. So the way that they're connecting this to Chinese threat actors is again the techniques, tactics, and sorry, what was that again? TTP techniques, tactics, and
Features.
procedures. Yeah, we uncovered key similarities between RedXOR and previously reported malware association with WinTi umbrella threat group, who I've not heard of before. So the previous malwares were PWN LNX, Pwn Linux, which is a backdoor, XOR.DDoS, which is probably a DDoS, and Groundhog, two botnets attributed to this WinT. So what they're saying here is that they, based on the code that's written, the way that they're using this malware looks very much like Chinese APT WinT, where they've seen before. Um, they're doing network encoding, persistent services, uh, major functions are built into this thing. I mean, if you get down into here, look at all these lines of code in here. This thing is beefy, really beefy. So somebody who is a threat researcher, again, we need one on the show. If that's you, please let us know. Could talk a lot about this. They're highlighting quite a few things here. I don't want to go over all these details too much, just because
You
we'll
can
be here
bog
for
into it.
hours.
Yeah, you can
Yeah.
bog into it. I mean, that's its
Yeah.
own separate little segment, but yeah, you can definitely see that there's a lot of sophistication behind it. Just in again, like we were talking about before, just in how they approach the attack,
Right.
obscuring, and I don't think we've gotten too deep into that yet.
No, so and you were saying on the last one, that some of these things look familiar, and you're going to feel
Hmm.
that again with this. Is a lot of very familiar key elements of the way that this malware works. First, just like any good malware, communication with the C2 server uses a TCP socket. The traffic's made to look like HTTP traffic. It is trying to evade look like typical user traffic in there in order to communicate with the C2 server. We saw that with Nobelium. We saw that with the ad blocker, the fake ad blocker we just talked about with Monero. Um, I know we've talked about it before. It just seems to be the trend with these things. And again, here we go, update functionality. So the malware can be updated by the threat actor. This is performed by sending command code 8 to the malware. So they use some kind of built-in command coding system. This is pretty funny to me. I always like this. It's cool. It's like, man, the hackers are doing it right. Even when companies are not, it's like the hackers are keeping their stuff updated, and they're patching vulnerabilities in the systems that they attack to make sure other things don't mess up what they're doing. That's they're super smart about this stuff. But this one's interesting because it's not just auto updated, but it's meant to be updated by the threat actor while they're in there, which is something you typically see of a persistent threat, because they need to keep it fresh, update it in order to do new things and work with the environment as it changes as well. It has a shell. Um, it provides the operator with a TTY shell, which is it's like a tiny little shell. So that gives you the backdoor access to it. So they can update it. They can access the system that is infected via a shell. There's a network tunneling, meaning they have like an encrypted route running on your tunnel network. Again, very similar to Nobelium. They've created this entire like shadow network on your network. They're running things, they're communicating with servers, and they're traversing the network all in its own encapsulated, tunneled system. So uh, super advanced. Again, very familiar. I think we're going to see more of these. These ones are kind of scary too, because
So
that's really
yeah,
hard to detect.
I was just going to ask that, and I was just taking a look at the screen below there, the detection methods there. But um, so obviously, yeah, this is definitely a trend. in your experience, is this something that's kind of come about more in the last year or so? Following SolarWinds. Did you ever kind of hear inklings of this in the past through some of your work?
Yeah,
Like maybe even just parts of the attack, maybe not all. The backdoor plus updating and set a second backdoor, things like that.
sure. I had before, and usually it was, especially when we first saw this stuff. I was working with the government, doing information assurance for IT systems there, and like what we were seeing was this kind of behavior only from you know state-sponsored like cyber attacks from
Hmm.
nation states, and now we're seeing it in everything. I mean, monero miner, that's not just you know cyber attack, and that's not a nation state attack, right? That's just some group trying to get rich. And so we're seeing this with lots more mundane stuff, less advanced malwares. So I think it's just going to continue to be the trend for sure.
So it's
It's
kind of
going to
broken out
trickle
into the
down.
public of threat actors, would you
Yeah.
say?
Oh
You know what I
yeah.
mean? Yeah.
Well, and it's really there to prevent. It's all about evasion, right? You don't want to get caught. As soon as it's caught, it gets removed, and your scheme's done, right? And a big part of that now is not just the systems that you have to get through, and IDSs and IPSs, intrusion detection systems and all that, but the people, the threat hunters. For a while, that was a huge thing, man. You had threat hunters, and like you had all these software systems running on it, and then you had the human eyes of experienced people who, you can look at something and go, wow, that does not look good. It does
Hmm.
not look right. Um, and it was really obvious based on the traffic and by what they were doing. And so now that these things are hiding their traffic, they're tunneling, they're encrypting themselves, it makes it so much harder for threat hunters to find these things. You know, we have to, on the blue team side, we've got to constantly constantly sharpen our skill set and our tool set in order to keep up with this kind of stuff, because they're updating it live, they're encrypting it. It takes a long time when you have to catch it and pull it apart and figure out what it's doing and where it's come from, and by then it's probably been updated.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's but no, I mean, definitely trickling down into the general threat public is just kind of, you see that a lot in like government, for example. Like government will come up with this really great technology, it will be used for those purposes, and then it comes in the consumer market and it's like, oh great, now you have Reynolds wrap, you know for
Right.
example, aluminum foil wrap. I mean, I think that was from NASA. So just kind of interesting how we're seeing that shift where it's, these are, like you said, very hard for threat hunters um, to identify these these patterns, or you can't find the patterns at all. And does that make it easier for um, I don't want to say like a script kiddie, because these are smart individuals, but like, could it be that you could end up buying, a kit like this off the
Oh
dark web
yeah.
or something like that?
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, Metasploit framework has, that's like the basic, starter kit for pen testing that's offered by Rapid7. Um, it's really just kind of exploit DB with some built-in ability to attack, but everything on there, started off like that, right? It was there's Eternal Blue on there, which used to be an NSA attack, right? And that's kind of built into Metasploit framework, and you can download that for free. You can be anybody, right? And
Mhm.
you know, a lot of people like to kind of make fun of it. It's like, well, maybe people who only use Metasploit are just script kiddies or not real pen testers or whatever it is. But it's like the reality is, if if that kit manages to get your systems, cool.
Doesn't
It
matter
doesn't
what you
matter.
use.
Who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't. That's a big thing that happens too. Is they get attacked. It's like, oh, well, the sophistication. It's like, who cares about how sophisticated it was? What if you got blasted by SMB-V1 with no signing? What if you put your stuff up on the internet without even putting a password on it? Who cares how
I was
sophisticated it
just
is?
gonna say that. Yeah.
So anyway, kind of circle. We got off a little bit of a tangent there, but there is some detection available for this one. So what you can do is you can look for the process ID 14339 running on your system. Here's a better image of what ints are provided here. You should find that in /root .po1kitd.thumb. So this is pretend to be, remember, Polkit, POL kit, but they put PO1 kit D. And
Hmm.
this is this is why I like oh man, what are those types of fonts called? You know, there's those types of fonts that like every single individual letter is different and they're, you know, not necessarily serifed, but you make sure the ones have the little tick on there and the eyes look like eyes because it can help prevent
Oh, right.
these
Yeah.
kinds of attacks, right? Because it doesn't look like an L or a one or a big I or whatever it's supposed to be on there. That's kind of what they're doing with this. But if you find this process ID on your system, you need to kill the process, delete all the files related to the malware, make sure your system's clean and running only trusted code. Um, there's a lot of ways to do that. Intezer is going to, try to sell you their stuff here. We'll have a link to this report from them. If you are a threat hunter, there are IOCs. You can find these kinds of things in Splunk, in Elk Stacks, whatever it is that you're running for your SIM there. But yeah, this is pretty cool. I like these. I kind of like these attacks that run on their own little shadow IT, right? They can be updated and they've got their
Mhm.
own network tunnel. That's really cool. They're really scary, but they're really cool. It takes a lot of work to build something like that.
It's it's like it's the James Bond of malware.
Right? Yeah, it is the
Really
coolest.
deep behind enemy lines. All right. Well, Josh, thanks for going through this week in the breach report. Is there anything else that we wanted to cover? Any final thoughts or takeaways?
Now, something we didn't talk about in any of these breach reports was hafnium. That's been going on. Some of these breaches are pretty similar to that. We didn't really cover that because I did want to bring more light to Nobelium because nobody really talked about that one. And, you know, breaches similar to this are going to be on the rise. So I'd really like to continue to monitor these and cover these. But yeah,
There's a lot
don't.
out there. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
there's a
we
lot.
try our best to sift through the ones that we think are not necessarily getting all of the attention, right? Anyone
Right.
can kind of talk about the latest and biggest attacks, but we want to kind of give light to more of the techniques, more um, a little bit of the speculation behind things, but just kind of getting everyone aware of all of the different types of attacks that are out there, and some prevention and mitigation, and in some cases some resolution if there is any to people.
Yeah, speaking of mitigation, we could talk all day about that. I mean, that's kind of what we do. So, if you feel like our responses about, what to do about these are a little bit light, check out the website. There is so much information on there. We definitely couldn't cover it all with one video. And, you know, stay safe and make sure all your stuff's up to date and don't trust those third parties.
Very true. Well, we'll leave it at that. Josh, thank you so much. And until next week, signing off. Take care.